So, as I mentioned yesterday, and I really stole, and I do that really a lot, other people's good, sayings. So, the Signal Commandant noted that the Signal School doesn't teach individuals just to graduate. There's actually a purpose for the training that they get. And so we did the same thing within the cyber school. That should be the point of any curriculum within the United States Army and our training schools. Our training is a little bit different right now, however, because all of our training has to meet a joint certification. So there are Army requirements for quality assurance and so forth. We have to meet all that. But you can meet quality assurance requirements and still not produce the soldiers that the operational force needs. And so in this time and space right now for the cyber mission force, those knowledge, skills, and abilities are not descriptive. They're extremely prescriptive. And really that was helpful in order to help stand up the cyber branch and the cyber school. But what we noticed is a couple of things. Number one, there's a difference between training an individual to make sure that they understand a knowledge, skill, and ability. And a lot of the training that was put together barely was able to do that. So NSA ADET did a great job pulling together non-contiguous training that was really meant for something else in order to bridge the gap for the services and give us the ability to stand something up to start to meet that. But one of the things that we were hearing is that individuals going through the training when they arrived on duty station is they did not understand the operational construct that they were being applied into, because there was not an operational umbrella, and that wasn't part of the training pipeline. It was really knowledge, skills, and abilities and things that they had to do. And so one of our challenges as we build out our POIs and our lessons plans is to not only meet the equivalency requirement for the knowledge, skills, and abilities, but also put it into an operational construct. And so that's something that you're going to hear. Another piece of it is when you just teach knowledge, skills, and abilities, it becomes very analytical. I'm going to teach you how to do A, I'm going to teach you how to do B, I'm going to teach you how to do C, or I'm going to teach you your multiplication tables. And so there's a lot of understanding and rote memory, and when you get done, you have individuals that may know their multiplication tables, but really don't know how to multiply, because they weren't taught that. So how do we lay it together so that they know what they know because they were taught in an environment that builds upon not only analytically but operationally? And then probably the third thing is ensuring that we're not just teaching skills. And so a little over a decade ago is when things like this were developed. And so what's going to be around for communications? What's going to be around for data manipulation and content staging and all those kinds of things 10 years from now? Well, we don't know. And so if we're not real careful, we will teach our cyber soldiers exactly what they need to know today, but leave them without any understanding of what tomorrow and the future will be. And so the other piece that they're going to hit is, instead of focusing on what needs to be trained, we've really not only operationalized, but we've brought it higher up on Bloom's taxonomy. And so they're given problem sets that they work through, and it's in a outcome-based, learner-centric, higher on Bloom's taxonomy environment. And so it's very challenging to do that and to make sure that all those knowledge, skills, and abilities are hit, and they're able to be certified when they leave. And so a lot of that's going to be explained, and the good news is we were recently given equivalency for our Cyber Technical Corps course that is going to be talked about from U.S. Cybercom J7 for the Intermediate Cyber Course. That's huge. So the Army, what that means is when we produce an MOS skilled soldier, when they arrive at their first duty assignment, they don't have to then go back into a training pipeline, but they can begin training right away. So that's one major component that you're going to hear about today. The other major component is, how do you set up a learning environment, a network environment, to be able to do that? And how do you do it in a manner that doesn't just focus on today's technologies and today's skill sets, but is able to be nimble enough to spin up the environments that we don't even know exist tomorrow? And how can we do it in such a manner as well that that environment closely replicates some of the environments that are being put in place by our teams for where they're putting their tools, they're putting their sensors. And so you're going to get another presentation on that and how that's been pulled together. And so as the information is being presented, hopefully there'll be some times for questions and answers. I'll tell you that we admit that we have it exactly wrong, but we have it mostly right. And it's huge for the Army to say that, because the Army, if anyone's been in the Army, they know, especially in Training Doctrine Command, they want you to have it exactly right. And in this battle space and time, it's almost impossible unless you aim a little forward and you happen to hit that from the moment those two things collide. But we've got it mostly right, and we are creating it iteratively so that we will continue to iterate and move forward. And so I'm going to introduce now Mr. Tom Barnes. He was one of, if not the first, civilian hires I made when I was detailed and given the mission to stand up a cyber school. And he comes with an exquisite background on the military intelligence side. And so I'm a signal career warrant officer by trade, now cyber. He's an MI guy. And actually we get along real well. But the one thing we had to do is we had to tag him with some type of a retention, because he grew up as an enlisted soldier. That bored him after a while, so then he became a warrant officer. Well, that bored him after a while, so then he became a military intelligence officer. And after so many years, he retired because that bored him, and then he moved over, and he's been doing great things and moving up. And so while we got him, we are exploiting everything that he has. And so I'm going to call him up here, and he's going to give an introduction, and then he's going to introduce his folks. But please, let this be interactive. We look forward to that.
Lucky for me, unlucky for you, Todd actually hit the majority of the things that I was going to talk about, so we'll try to roll through it pretty quick. I kind of found this kind of odd over the last couple of days. I've heard everybody talk about the cyber branch, how they've been developing, how new it is, and the fact that if you look on the wording there, that it was set up in 2014. As I was sitting there talking to my wife last night, we were kind of talking that if you go to the maneuver school, if you go out to the infantry school, ICO, or any of those other ones, you're going to see similar things which stood up the branch, but you're also going to see a picture there beside it, where you have all these people who are probably full of knowledge and had the foresight to stand up a new branch and all the other stuff, and that's kind of where we are now. The only problem is when you go over to the cyber school and you look at that picture, the only thing that's going through my mind is I look kind of fat, and I can't really figure out if I let myself go after retirement. So a lot of what Todd talked about as far as the cyber school training map, we did not, and we purposely did not, really try to reinvent the wheel as we were going through and looking for the training that we wanted to give the enlisted, the officers, and the warrant officers. So to kind of orient you to the slide, the top three blocks would be your enlisted tracks at your 17 Charlie 10 level, followed by ALC and SLC. Moving towards the middle of the slide, you get into the officer track, BOLIT, a transition course, and then a captain's career course. And then at the bottom, the Warrant Officer Advanced course and the Warrant Officer Basic course. If you really dig into each one of these nuggets, you're going to find that they trace themselves back to the Cyber Mission Force and the J7 Cybercom pipeline. And so, again, we've done that very intentionally because we have to not only qualify these soldiers for what we don't know to be the exact thing that they're going to face in the future, but we also got to qualify them for what we know they need to do once they get to the operational force. So again, we have spattered some things in here, but a lot of it is very much right off of the Cybercom J7 pipeline. And we work very closely with ADET and our other partners to make sure that everything is synced very properly. On the right-hand side, you see all the work roles that we plan on having the soldiers trained. This is what they'll be qualified to do. And again, the Army is kind of doing something very different than the other services in that we're training our soldiers to not only have an offensive but a defensive mindset. Kind of using the words of General Cardone, you don't have offense infantry and defensive infantry. You must be able to interchange and adapt to that mission as the enemy is coming at you because they get a vote on what's going on. You really can't take a pause X to switch out the seats to go from the offense guy to the defensive guy. Now, granted, we understand and we know that you will have people who have specialties, which is great because you need people with those specialties, but you need to have people who have flavors of both so that they can transition very quickly. And again, so everybody who's been around the Cyber Mission Force, this is not a new training model. This is the training model that Cybercom came out with about 3 to 4 years ago. And again, what we're doing should not seem really strange, but if you talk to a lot of the services, it is kind of a twist on what we're doing. That 2,000 level training, those foundation courses, before the cyber school was stood up, soldiers went to the mission and then they got trained on another job once they got to the mission. And if you haven't done that, it can take anywhere from 6 months to about 18 months to get a soldier trained up. That's time you're losing for that soldier to be operational and employed in the fight. So what we've done is taken a look at the training pipeline and taken the most common of all that relates to those work roles that were on the previous slide, and we're moving it to the institution. We're moving it for the Army into the TRADOC environment so that we can train them so that when they do show up to the units, they have much more operational time to actually get at the mission. So again, that's kind of the big idea of what we're doing at the schoolhouse, and I'm going to turn it over to Major Rodriguez, who's going to kind of give you some of the learning philosophy and really what our flagship course CCTC is designed to do and what it's going to take us to do in the future.
Good morning. As Mr. Boudreau is saying, what we look at doing is not just what we have to do from this pipeline, but also what we need to do to meet what the operational force is saying they need, and also what they need to start thinking about what they're going to need to actually lead the target, not to just look at what we need now and what we did need in the past, but where are we going? So with that are three kind of foundational questions behind our, if you will, mission command, like how we look at doing what we do, why we do it is the first question. And the order is very important. If any of y'all have ever heard Simon Sinek, he's a leadership speaker, talk, the why has to be the first thing. If it's not, if we focus more on what successful training is and student outcomes, so how do we train and to what standards are we training, so we could look at it that way, right? We could look at what are we training, and we could just go back to the pipeline and say, that's what we're training. We need students to graduate with those abilities so that they can meet their joint qualification requirements. And we could just look at that, and we could then say, okay, now we'll back up and say, well, why are we training to achieve a certain student throughput so that we can provide force readiness? But that definition of force readiness is inherently flawed. So first, let's start with the why. Given what Mr. Boudreau is saying, given who you are, why you're here, what you're doing, what would you say our why is? And I'll repeat it back for the, or even give you the mic. Who has a why? Why do we train? Yes, so the comment is to be proficient, to know our job. That's great. That's along those lines. Other ideas? Why? To develop experience. Okay, that goes into the training, yeah, to be proficient, to know our job, to have experience, to develop that experience that allows us to use those KSAs. To accomplish the mission. I'm liking that. Anyone have an idea that builds upon that? Accomplish the mission. Yes, we're talking all around it. And so this is great because we understand what it is we're aiming at. But I want to hit it right on the head. Why did I join the Army? Why are we doing what we do if we're in uniform? To protect our nation, right. So defense of our nation, and specifically for Cyber Corps, or Cyber Branch, is to do that in the cyberspace domain. So to protect and defend our nation in the cyberspace domain. That is our ultimate why. So all of those other things are fantastic. Those build upon that. But if we're looking at that as our why, then that keeps us aligned to where we need to go. Because if we're just focusing more on those skills and that experience, what if our ultimate destination is not exactly where it needs to be? So you could develop a lot of greatness, but if it's not pointed in the right direction, then it's not meeting what we need it to meet in the future. So why we train, support and defend our nation and the ideals for which our nation stands. When we're talking about joint partnerships, that's not just our nation, that's our ideals, our national ideals. So being able to do that in the cyberspace domain. Defining successful training based on that then is what will allow us to meet that, not just now, but in the future. I'm getting my words a little mixed here. The what. The how we do it, though, the define successful training. So if we're looking at the how we train folks that are able to do that, it's going to go back to, can they solve the problems that they don't even necessarily know exist yet? And so then our what becomes what specific courseware we create, and what are the specific instructional delivery methods we use to deliver that courseware. Okay. All right, so with that as our framework here, we've got XKCD up behind me, and this is a good analogy for everything that we've said. So this is a math course, and they're getting a substitute teacher in, and the substitute teacher is giving them a test. They probably didn't expect a test by what they're saying on there, and they certainly did not expect to get a test on things for which they had not been explicitly trained. So they're complaining, as students are prone to do. Substitute teacher says, nope, not going to hear it, you're going to take this test. And they're like, but why? It's a matter of life and death. So if you see here, the reason that he wants them to take this test is to understand those mathematical principles that they should have been learning, but maybe weren't learning in the way they needed to learn them, are things that could improve their survivability given these certain scenarios with velociraptors. So one of them is a scenario just based on speed, your speed relative to the velociraptor speed, how long before you get eaten. Another one is given the velociraptor on the top of that diagram is a little slower because it's injured, what is the angle at which you should escape to maximize your survivability? And the last one, which I find really interesting, is that given a map, which we don't see on here, that you're actually going to try and figure out how to get out of a building, but the adversary gets smarter and smarter, in this case, opening doors. So the speed of the velociraptor to open that door is going to increase as time progresses, right? So the situation is not ever the same. And the situation here is not one for which the students have been prepared. What does this have to do with cyberspace operations? What does this have to do with CCTC? Okay. So our students, we trained them on Linux, Windows, networking and security, followed the ICC, what we needed to train. But how we did it, we're really trying to go back into the why we're doing something to get that how. So our how was that in Linux, they learned command line, they learned scripting, they learned some things to do with networking. We never talked about databases. So on their end of module exam that we gave them, there was a practical that required them to use a database. Now they understood how to look up command lines and how to look up help on a topic or a man page, or they had open internet, right? So they could have all the resources at their fingertips to be able to solve what they needed to do with this database. But we had not explicitly taught them MariaDB. I think every single student, except for the ones who didn't read the question carefully or really try and understand the problem, and if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to be able to solve it, right? They did fine. They did well, right? So that proved that they were able to them even, built their confidence. They didn't know how to do something until they were given the problem. But because of the way that they had learned those fundamentals, they were able to put what they knew together and solve that problem that they had never seen before. So, velociraptors. So CCTC is fundamental to all of our MOS qualifying courses. So this is just a blown-up version of some of what Mr. Barnes was talking about before. So all three components here, we have it for the enlisted, both the officers who are coming in straight, the basic officer leaders course, as well as the transition course. And then for a period of time, yet to be determined by the Warrant Officer Corps, until we start seeing the 17 Charlie 10s roll through, apply, and become 170 alphas, then the 170 alphas are also going to get CCTC. So it's really a gatekeeper for the cyber branch. And that being the case, it goes really back to that why. Are my folks passionate about what they do? Yes, because this is going to set up our cyber branch to be able to be the folks that we need them to be to defend our nation in the cyberspace domain and to meet the unknown technology needs of tomorrow, as it says at the very bottom. This is really busy, and I don't want to focus too much on this. This is a brief overview of the different objectives that we had them look at. So taking intermediate cyber core, and going towards CCTC, trying to look at how we were arranging things. And we're still looking at how we're arranging and organizing things because, again, we can't just do something and then sit on our laurels and say we're good, because then we're not going to be chasing that target. We're going to be chasing the target. We're not going to be leading the target, and we need to lead the target. So as Mr. Boudreau said, we did achieve alt ICC equivalency. We are still looking to get our course approved to be a prerequisite for some of the other ICC prerequisites right now, what ICC is a prerequisite for. One of the very interesting things about this, though, is that it's much, much cheaper because of the way that we're doing it than the alt ICC has been. So alt ICC was somewhere around $20,000 per student. This is more around $4,000 per student. So that's a significant cost savings. But it's not just a cost savings. When we're looking at this, we're looking at this as being an actual improvement in their ability. The reason that it's a cost savings is because instead of paying for training per seat, we're paying for the people. So if you've ever had an inspiring teacher who knew their stuff to a great depth, then you were much more motivated to sit in that class. And guess what? If we pay that teacher and we pay a whole bunch of those teachers and make a really great cell that's able to both instruct as well as develop, as well as look at assessments, be able to change assessments, have that flexibility because they are actual subject matter experts, and then they inspire each other and sharpen each other, that's a lot cheaper than paying per seat. So that's why you see the weekly cost per student, and this is a very simplistic model. So really, our weekly cost per student is probably a little bit under that, given some other things that we're not overgeneralizing. It's something that we're still obviously working on. We have a great core group of folks, but as with any organization, as we start to develop and grow, that's one of the things we really need to do is make sure we continue to provide great instructors who can also develop so that our students coming through really get that ability to think forward, to know that they can look at something. If they have questions, they can ask those questions, get the questions answered, so that they have the confidence in putting together different solutions. One of the things that makes this possible also at a low cost is the virtual training area. And the reason that we needed to look at providing our own virtual training area is because training is our core competency. And if we have the ability to ensure that we can do what we need to do at the speed of rate which we need to do it, because a lot of what we're putting together changed quickly and will continue to change quickly. And to talk about that, we're going to go to Captain Afcea, who is the developer of that.
Hello, my name is Captain Aspey. I'm the Deputy Director of the Technical College at the Cyber School. Major Rodriguez brought up a lot of good points about the kind of training that we need to do, about the rapid reconfiguration, about the ability to change stuff on the fly. So TRADOC's current model for curriculum development just doesn't work for us, right? So if we wait 2 years before we change our curriculum, like we're already dead in the water, right? So we needed something that could support this rapid reconfiguration, and that thing was the virtual training area. So when I first showed up at the cyber school about a year ago, this whole virtual training area thing was kind of on the back burner. No one was really thinking about it so much. We had some servers and stuff in-house, but no one really gave it a lot of thought. As we started talking to industry about some options, about ways we could accomplish this mission, there's a little bit of sticker shock there, right? So we had a really large requirement, and to go along with that requirement was a really large bill from the private sector. So sat down, thought about it, said, hey, we can do better. You know, we can respect the taxpayer dollar and come up with an as good solution in-house, developed internally, as could the private sector. So one of the first things we did was made an OV1. What is our vision? What do we want to do? How do we want to implement this? So we realized we wanted to have the same environment in the classroom as students would have access to at home, on the weekends, on the couch, on the beach, on leave, wherever they're at, right? We want to have the same experience wherever you are in the world. Secure, log in from anywhere, two-factor authentication, all the cool guy stuff that the DoD requires. As you can see here, students in the classroom connecting to a cloud right? Everyone loves the cloud, so this is kind of a cloud-centric platform, a private cloud, so to speak. We have it attached to a commercial internet connection that students can access, right performance, gigabit symmetrical, from wherever they are in the world, be they deployed downrange or in Korea or Hawaii or wherever they're at. This is kind of like the high-level overview. Rapid reconfiguration. You guys have heard the term DevOps before. It's kind of like the buzzword du jour in the IT sector. We look at it as our students being the developers, the consumer of this service, and operations are the cyber school staff. So traditionally, operations get a requirement from the users to say, hey, I need a VM that does this thing, is set up in this way, has these services installed on it, on this kind of network, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the operations says, okay, give me 2 days or however long it needs to set that thing up, and they go and they do it 2 days later. Here's your VM, your network, whatever you ask for, go ahead, train. Okay, you're all done, tear it down, do it again, over and over and over again. That doesn't work, right? So the manpower requirement to use that kind of model is astronomical with the size of the cyber mission force. So we need to enable the end user to do this themselves. We need to give them the tools they need to decide how they're going to train on a daily basis. So our end state is there isn't going to be specific courseware or VMs or networks for our courses. The students are going to create their own stuff. If they want to use Debian Linux, cool. You can make a Debian Linux machine and bring it to the course with you and use that during the whole course. If you want to use Windows, you want to use SLES, it doesn't matter. We don't care. All you have to do is be able to meet these minimum set of requirements that will be published with each course, right? So students work on tasks at home, bring their VMs into the classes they attend, use them, connect up, submit challenge flags or whatever we have going for the course that day, and they roll out and do it again the next day. That self-development, not only are they actually learning the tasks that are being explicitly taught in the courses, they also have to learn how to program to an extent, right? So because our VTA requires students to use an API and program successfully, it's kind of a knock-on effect of having it set up that way. Minimizing personnel costs. You don't have a huge operations staff. The VTA staff is me and one contractor, and that's it. Maximize productivity. Everything that students do, if they choose to share it, can be shared on a Git repository, right? So if you come up with a really cool, configuration for a network where you can learn a cool skill, you upload it to this Git repository, everyone else has immediate access to it forever, and it's there. And because it's on Git, we have version control, we have the ability to look back, 5 years ago, say, hey, how was CCTC configured on this exact date? We go back and look and see what that looks like. We can see how we matured over time. We can see, we can correlate test scores versus iterations of the course. So we say, hey, this iteration of CCTC had much higher scores than previous ones. What was different? And we can look line by line what's been different in that course indefinitely. Reduce limitations in future problem solving. Because it's all commodity hardware, because there's no specific way it's set up, there's no proprietary information, everything's totally open source, we can make this whatever we want it to be, tomorrow. If I don't want to completely change the way it's set up tomorrow, I just go do it, write the code, and it's done. And we can do this forever, indefinitely. Avoid bottlenecks or obstacles to forward progress, right? So if any of you guys have ever been through the ATO process, getting an information system approved, it's very, very painful, right? By doing it this way, we get one ATO approved for our core system that can be reconfigured indefinitely and fall into the same old ATO. So you do it once and you're good forever. You just expand the system out as you need it to add more capacity. So I'm not aware of this kind of method being used anywhere else in the DoD, particularly in TRADOC. When we first showed up, there's kind of the standard, hey, just buy a bunch of VMware stuff and put it on Dell servers, and you hire, a 20-guy IT team, and you call it a day. We said, well, why don't we just try something different? And that's what we ended up doing. These are the core components of the VTA. The main one, kind of the core, is OpenStack. If you guys are familiar with OpenStack, it's basically a family of independent projects that have it's completely open source. It has standardized APIs, and it's basically a pluggable modular architecture. So if you decide, hey, I need to be able to run, a DNS service, you plug in the DNS service, and everyone has access to it. If you decide you want to be able to run, an object storage system, you plug in the object storage, and everyone has access to it. We run it on KVM. We don't use VMware. We use all complete commodity hardware. So if half the rack dies, it doesn't matter. Just buy a new one, plug it in, you're good to go. Ceph is our storage platform. Ceph is another open source tool that lets us use scale out storage. And what that means is if we, 5 years from now realize, hey, we need way more space than we have right now, we don't have to go out and do a forklift upgrade and buy a whole new box for, $20 million. We just add a little bit more as we need indefinitely. CEP is used at national laboratories like Sandia and LLNL, so it scales out to the exabytes of storage, so we're never ever going to have to swap the system out. Salt stack is configuration management. What this lets us do is it lets students, once they deploy their environment, if they just need to make a minor, teeny tiny change, you don't want to redeploy everything, they can use Salt Stack to make those changes on the fly. Salt Stack at its heart is a remote execution engine, meaning that I can issue one command on one machine and it'll be run in 5,000 different places simultaneously. And then everyone will report back saying, yes, I was successful, no, I failed, give me reasons why, et cetera, et cetera. There's more to it than that, obviously, but at its core, that's what it does. Contrail, or Open Contrail specifically, is a network function virtualization platform. That's what we use to orchestrate our network connectivity. So students, if they decide, hey, I need to make 20 different IPv4 networks on these specific subnets to run my VM, Contrail is the thing that makes all that happen. Another benefit of Contrail is that recently, the most recent version, they implemented something called the Data Plane Development Kit. And so traditionally, for high-performance networking, you needed to have your pizza box. You needed a Cisco router because ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits, are much more performant in general than commodity x86 processors. What Contrail did by adding DPDK was it enabled standard x86 processors to route packets at a much better rate than was previously possible. So you can do line rate 10, 40, 100 gigabit processing on commodity processors, and you don't need the pizza boxes anymore. So we don't have any Cisco routers, we don't have Juniper routers, we don't have any kind of standard routers, just regular switches, and we do all our routing in software. So this is kind of what the Horizon dashboard looks like. This is what the user sees. There's more stuff behind the scenes that operations looks at. But in a nutshell, this is what students see when they log in. It's kind of small, but there's a couple tabs over here. You can see, the different compute hosts that are in your pool. If you click on project, you'll see the instances you have running, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll give you guys a quick demo to kind of see how this would kind of work. All right, so this is just the login page. So here, project instances. Let me switch over to the admin page. Instances. So if you're a student, every student gets their own tenant, their own project. So all VMs that you ran yourself would be listed here. I have nothing. It's an empty project right now. I kind of mentioned before that we can use GitHub or Bitbucket or really any Git-compatible service to kind of power this orchestration. So I'm going to do a demo of that right now. So over in this tab, I have my personal repository where I have some YAML written. And what that is it's a specification language that says, hey, my parameters are kind of like input variables, if you guys understand programming. So input variables are stuff that, hey, I need to inject this specific information into my template. And then you define those, then you scroll down a little bit, you define your resources, which is like your networks, your VMs, your IPs, your routers, everything you need to make a functioning network. And these are all defined here. You can pull in variables from up top, so your student defines, hey, I want my subnet to be this. And so it pulls in that information and deploys it kind of on the fly. See, make my router, make my interface. Here's a resource group. So I kind of set this up to kind of show some capabilities. You can define, hey, I want to have 20 this kind of VM, and that's what a resource group does. And so what it'll do is it'll make 20 copies and then kind of iterate the configuration based on like some kind of index. So starting at 0, going through 100, or whatever index that you want. So we'll kind of do a demo of that right here. So we can just take the URL straight from Bitbucket, go to orchestration, launch a stack, and put in my URL. So first thing when I click next, it'll pull it down. It'll do a quick check and make sure that, hey, this is fully valid YAML. There's no syntax errors, any of that stuff. That's the first check it does. All right, and so like I said before, I had some parameters. So here I have to define those parameters. It's going to ask me, what do you want to inject into the stack you're about to deploy. So I'm just going to call it test stack. Admin password. This is our login password, so it has the privileges to kind of execute all these commands I'm telling it to do. last name, Afcea. I'll show you what I do with the last name and this other stuff here in a minute. Number of VMs to spawn, we'll just say 6. Root password, so you can inject passwords and stuff. You can inject anything into the VM, but just to kind of show how this works, we'll just do passwords. I'm going to make a password 123. Student ID, I'll make that 8. And I'll show you how this all comes into play here in a second. Right? So click launch. Okay, great, it's creating. And we can kind of see the creation progress here. Now, green means it's complete, gray means it's still working. So if you look at the stuff that's green, you can see that your router, your subnet, and your network have all been created, right? So the system is intelligent enough to know that, hey, I can't make a VM until the network already exists. So it'll do things in the correct order automatically to make sure that it doesn't try and make a VM that doesn't have a network that already exists yet. So it's kind of waiting. It's making router interface. Okay, it says create complete. All the stuff should be green, and it is. Great. Now we go back to instances. And we see there's the 6 VMs that I made, indexed 0 through 5. It took my last name and made it the host name automatically. I just set it up that way. It doesn't have to be that way. It iterated them. It used my student ID, the number 8, and it made that the second octet in my IP address. I just set it up that way. It doesn't have to be that way. And so right now, all these things are spawning and booting. And I can look at the log and kind of see where it's at in the process. So here, for security-conscious people, you can look at your SSH fingerprints and make sure that when you connect this VM later on down the road, that the SSH fingerprint matches what you expect it to be. You can also see here, remember how I said I wanted to change the root password? Well, there, that happened right there. So it took the password that I gave it and just injected it right into that user account. And it did that for all 6 VMs because it didn't have any differences between them. And here you can see Cloud Init finished today. And so that took all of 42 seconds from start to finish, spawning that VM and configuring it the way I wanted it to go. If we go back to the page and I click on the console, root, and I should be able to log in with password 123. Let's see. Hey, there it goes. And see how the host name is actually Afcea Debian 3, because that's what I told it to iterate through. So this is a very, very small subset of capabilities that the system has. You can basically, you can inject arbitrary code into boot, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Totally up to you. Does anyone have any questions about how all this works or how we came up with this? Sir?
Thank you. Harry Wingo, this is fantastic. Question about for the STEM efforts. I know that around the area there's so many schools, high schools, middle schools, colleges, 2-year colleges. What's the longer term? I mean, one, can they access some version of this online now? Is this through your website? How are you getting the push to get the community engagement?
So that is vastly above my pay grade. I don't know what our community outreach policies are, but Tom, do you have any? Or Todd?
So the first thing I want to do is do this. Watch this. So Major Rodriguez, when Captain Aspey is Major Aspey, what will his challenges be? Yeah, so it could be velociraptors. So I mean that's the and Captain Aspey, how many hours of your own personal time did you spend doing this?
I'd rather not say, sir.
Exactly. So see what happens when you let people just work in their passions. I mean, great things happen. And so that's what I want to leverage on. So how do you? So we are a brand new school. We have like zero bandwidth to do what we're supposed to be doing, but yet we are trying to reach into the local community. I see some heads nodding that understands that same thing or on the same challenges. And we're really trying to sow the local community as well. And so some of it is when you find people's passions and the local community has needs, I think through community engagements, open forums in the school, some of the like makerspace that's being done, I hope that'll just happen. The government does have some programs where they can offer and do some volunteer stuff. But if you were at yesterday mid-morning, early afternoon, and you find folks like Mr. Tom Patterson, and so they can help to be able to fund some things like this. So what we have is skills. What we don't have is money. What we don't have a lot of is time. But when everyone comes together and link that together, I think you'll start to see this happen.
At the service academies. So I'm Naval Academy class of '88, and I know West Point and General Hernandez that they are leaning forward harder than anybody. They've got 70-plus bullets. They filled half of them. Air Force Academy, so CDX, the cyber defense exercise that ran for over a decade now, I think it would be amazing if you shared this with them, and you've got at least a committed core of 15 to 20 students who, instead of doing athletic stuff after classes, they're going and doing capture the flags. They would eat this up if they don't have it already. And what would be amazing if you get them on that environment, one, if somebody says it at the academy, hey, you will do this, that will work. 2-3 years out, you might have the entire brigade of midshipmen, the entire Corps of Cadets involved. So you've kind of got, sci-fi reference Ender's Game, but you've got a platform where you can do this environment. It's kind of the same way you have to have your room inspected. You have to make sure your own personal computer has its IDSs, IPSs, honeypots put in. And then if you put an AI cluster on top of that and watch what's going on with all of it, you could have some interesting capabilities. But this is fantastic, so thanks. NDU also, another thing. Very easy, get that running a lot sooner. Don't know if they've seen it, but just kudos. Great job. Thank you.
So last year we actually had the opportunity to be a part of the CDX at West Point. And I think that that's a really great idea to get involved with them sooner, because in the past they had where the CDX was just the students kind of coming together in the 6 or 8 weeks before the actual event. And now it's actually an entire semester that they get to spend working on that. So we could definitely reach out to them sooner and get them this a lot sooner, and and all the other components as well. But we just already have those connections with West Point. But I think that's a really great idea.
We've done RMF out there, but we're in Enclave's Enterprise IT. And so, as an example, Mr. Bennett's had the company for 38 years, about 275 folks, and really wants to get involved here. We're also in Aberdeen. But we support the Maryland Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at UMaryland. And we know there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on at the University of Maryland. That's a great civilian school. So glad to hear that you're already involved. But as a company, ASD, would love the support, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people from industry who would like to lean in. I didn't even know this existed, so this is great. Thank you.
Instead of having them either not do athletics to do this or to not do this to do athletics, you've heard of extreme golf, right? So we could do some extreme measures, and are our floppy disks still undefeated? Those that laugh know what I'm talking about.
Yes. So this is beta quality. We'll call it beta quality. So we are hoping to be live no later than 15 October in full production.
So related to your go live, when your students are completing their exercises, how are you grading them based upon their output of the exercise?
That's a great question. So there's lots of different ways we can do that. Another student named Lieutenant Dave Twitchell made a CTF server, kind of homebrew, written in Python, which we now kind of maintain internally in the schoolhouse. If you guys are familiar with the concept of CTF, basically it lets us define in software tasks for students to do. Break this password hash, decrypt this SSL session, break this web key. Yeah, find the malware. So anything, like, single individual tasks. And it's designed in such a way where if a student successfully completes a task, they'll have some kind of output that they can then submit to the server and then get points back, which then are added into their total for a course or, whatever you want to do, with that. And so it's set up in such a way that to add more challenges, there's a standard kind of format for where a challenge should work, and so it's super easy. Just add more stuff in, ad infinitum. So that's kind of one of the ways we grade our students.
And that'll be integrated into the curriculum for CCTC?
Yes. So during our first or second pilot of CCTC, it was actually directly integrated into the curriculum. We had a scoreboard, and students could see, compete with each other. We had the top 20, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's absolutely integrated.
Thank you.
In addition to the CTF, we also had, which is Capture the Flag in case you didn't know the acronym, we also did have some practicals where they had to, a larger problem than maybe some CTFs that Captain Aspey just described. And we also do look at the knowledge because that keeps us in line with what they're expected to know for the CMF pipeline. But again, what will actually lead them to be able to problem solve, and that's where we're starting to get into those ways of assessment.
Just another question: have you considered taking feeds from industry? And I know there's a database for CVEs and working with NISTA or DHS cert to go across the board. And I guess you could focus on whatever. But is that something you'll be able to do October 15th?
Sure. So as long as the feeds are publicly available and they're published kind of like through an API over the internet, we can pull all those things in without issue. That's not a problem. Because like I said, this is not on NIPR, this is not SIPR, JWICS, whatnot. This is on commercial internet. We own and control every component in this system, so we can absolutely integrate that.
With the commercial internet provider you're working with, do you have any issues with throwing some malware out into what is effectively their system and then sending the students to clean it up? Is there any discussion of the malware incidents that you're creating?
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. So I mentioned before that we have this thing called Contrail, and the beauty of Contrail is that if students are working with malware, we can segment their personal networks in such a way that they can't escape or route to anywhere except their own internal personal network. Like there's physically no way to get from student VM to internet. And so when we work with malware, that's kind of the tactic that we use. Does that make sense, sir? Mm-hmm. Sure. No, explicitly no. It was not actively approved by the provider, no. All right, thanks very much.
All right, since there doesn't seem to be too many more questions, I would like to take a few minutes to recognize some of the other people who aren't up here in uniform. So Staff Sergeant Orsleen, who is in the back, one of the people that we stole from Maryland who came down, and a huge part in putting together the CCTC curriculum and ensuring that it met all of the ICC standards as we moved through ADET to achieve equivalency. And then also CW4 Eason, who is our senior technical advisor for the school, working with them. So again, I know that Todd, Mr. Boudreau really harps on the fact that there's not a lot of people at the cyber school, but literally with the 4 people that you see here, they make my job very easy. As Mr. Bova just got through telling me over and over during this presentation that I had the easiest job at the school. They have really put themselves into making the school a success and building something that we can really capitalize on and just continue to export, as you said, sir, to kind of make the rest of the community better so we can start feeding this animal. All right, thank you.